not going to comment on any of this stuff until this took place. Watch what she says. The entire internet has reacted to this. Here's Brittney Griner. They're playing against the Indiana Fever, and look what she's saying. Go ahead, Rob.
Or the ticky-tack fouls that we were talking about earlier today.
Well, that pretty much sounds like trash. If you want fans, if you want your league to grow, act like a professional, okay? The league already started underwater, and instead of fixing it, they're just poking more holes in the boat. And think about it, Brittney Griner talking all that trash. We traded the merchant of death for your ass, and you're out there talking.
What happens when the savior of a league, the one player breathing new life into its very existence, becomes its most targeted figure, not by old rivals on the court, but seemingly from within its own ranks? And what if the reward for bringing unprecedented attention, for shattering viewership records and selling out arenas, is a venomous whisper, allegedly caught on a hot mic during a moment of frustration, a whisper that then ignites a firestorm of accusations and exposes deep, festering wounds? This isn't a hypothetical scenario, it's the storm that erupted in the WNBA, a controversy so intense it took a no-holds-barred podcast crew to rip the veneer off what many now see as a carefully yet precariously constructed image of unity and progress. The Patrick Bet David podcast team didn't just comment on the situation involving Brittney Griner and Caitlin Clark, they detonated a truth bomb that continues to send shockwaves through the world of sports and beyond.
If you want fans, if you want your league to grow, act like a professional, okay? The league already started underwater, and instead of fixing it, they're just poking more holes in the boat. And think about it, Brittney Griner talking all that trash. We traded the merchant of death for your ass, and you're out there talking shit.
The initial spark, the moment that lit the fuse, occurred during a seemingly routine game. Brittney Griner, a veteran star, fouled out against Caitlin Clark's Indiana Fever. Hot mics picked up Griner's clear frustration, her words audible for the world to hear. Ticky-tack fouls, that pretty much sounds like trash. In the charged atmosphere of professional sports, such comments might typically fade, but this was different. This involved Caitlin Clark, the rookie phenomenon who had become a cultural lightning rod, and the trash comment, while pointed, was soon overshadowed by something far more incendiary. Whispers quickly turned into roars across the internet, fueled by amateur lip readers and social media sleuths. They claimed to have deciphered another, far more venomous phrase mouthed by Griner in the heat of that same moment, a derogatory and racially charged slur allegedly aimed directly at Clark. While official confirmation of this specific alleged slur remains elusive, its reported nature, something akin to calling Clark a white girl, was so inflammatory that it instantly transcended sports blogs and fan forums, becoming a national talking point. The alleged utterance, whether accurately perceived or not, painted a damning picture for many, suggesting a level of personal animosity and racial undertones that were deeply troubling. This single moment, or perhaps these two distinct alleged utterances, one clearly heard, the other fiercely debated but widely believed, became the catalyst. It was the fuse that led to a verbal demolition from an unexpected source, a takedown that many felt was not only justified but catastrophically overdue, a reckoning for a league perceived to be riddled with hypocrisy.
With Brittney Griner, right? And then the other quote, Rob, then I'm going to wrap this up and then I'm going to go to Adam. Put the quote of Brittney Griner, what she said about the NBA. This is so funny how all this stuff works out, right? She says, this is from Brittney, every time we play her, there's this commotion, like this loud rumbling from the stands. Turns out it's people, thousands of them, just sitting there, watching on purpose.
Enter Vincent Oshana and the Patrick Bet David podcast team. They didn't just offer a polite opinion or a measured sports analysis. They launched a verbal blitzkrieg. Their critique of Brittney Griner and the WNBA wasn't just scathing. It was a meticulous, brutal dismantling of reputations and narratives, delivered with a ferocity rarely seen in mainstream commentary. Their central thesis was damning. Griner, they argued, was exhibiting profound hypocrisy, and the WNBA itself was mired in what they described as systemic moral decay, operating under a suffocating blanket of double standards. Oshana, in particular, held nothing back, his words dripping with contempt for what he saw as a culture of entitlement and inverted justice. The raw, unfiltered nature of their commentary, free from the usual public relations spin or cautious equivocation, struck a chord. It resonated powerfully with a massive audience, an audience that felt unheard, an audience that had been watching the unfolding drama around Caitlin Clark Clark with a growing sense of unease and disbelief. The PBD podcast segment went viral almost instantly, not just because it was controversial, but because for many it articulated a truth they felt deep in their bones, a truth that the established sports media seemed unwilling or unable to address. They didn't just tap into public sentiment, they gave voice to a simmering volcano of frustration that had been building for months, if not years, waiting for a spark to ignite it, and ignite it they did.
Griner voiced frustration in a recent interview, claiming that Caitlin Clark is ruining what used to make the WNBA great. Wait for this.
Empty stands?
Tom, let me just.
go ahead, I'm so mad.
WNBA games used to be a chill, quiet place. You could bring your laptop and relax, maybe even get a little work done. But now it's like there's a large gathering of people watching us from the stands. Some of them are yelling crazy shit about what they're seeing, putting unfair pressure on us to score. Like we're
perhaps the most devastating weapon in Oshana's arsenal of critique, the point that seemed to land with the force of a sledgehammer, was a pointed, deeply uncomfortable reminder of Griner's own recent dramatic international ordeal. The PBD crew relentlessly focused on the controversial prisoner exchange that had secured Griner's freedom from a Russian penal colony, the swap that saw her return to the United States in exchange for Victor Bout, the notorious international arms dealer infamously known as the Merchant of Diath. The irony, as Oshana and the PBD team painted it, was staggering and deeply unsettling to many Americans. Here was a player whose freedom had been prioritized at the highest levels, secured in a deal for a man responsible for fueling conflicts and enabling atrocities across the globe. And now this same player was embroiled in a domestic controversy, accused of making racially charged remarks against a teammate who was, by all accounts, single-handedly elevating their league. For the PBD team, this wasn't just a misstep, it was a monumental display of perceived ingratitude, a shocking lack of self-awareness, and a symbol of massively skewed priorities, both for Griner and for the broader system that championed her release. Oshana hammered this point home with brutal efficiency, using it to question Griner's judgment, her current conduct, and even the wisdom of the high-stakes geopolitical bargain made on her behalf. It was a line of attack that resonated deeply, touching on raw nerves about fairness, patriotism, and accountability. But the PBD team's scorching analysis didn't just linger on Griner's past actions or the circumstances of her return. It pivoted sharply to the WNBA's turbulent present, particularly its perplexing, often criticized, and seemingly self-sabotaging handling of its brightest new phenomenon, Caitlin Clark.
The WNBA is never, ever, ever going to work and never make money. And this is exactly what Caitlin Clark gets for bending the knee. Do you guys remember when she said, when we lost all respect for her, when she said, I want to say I've earned every single thing, but as a white person, there is privilege. And the more we can elevate black women, this is going to be a beautiful thing. That's when it was all over. And Angel Reese and Brittney Griner, they walk around like the league owes them something. Even Ryan Clark's attitude as if, bro, where's the victimhood? These are freaking millionaires. Like, what are you talking about? It's attitude, it's no humility, just entitlement, and that's not confidence.
The PBD team then aimed their rhetorical cannons directly at the WNBA establishment, leveling an explosive argument. The league, they contended, was not only failing to protect Caitlin Clark, its undisputed biggest draw and most significant revenue generator in history, but was almost complicit in her being targeted. They meticulously constructed a narrative amplified by countless viral clips and fan accounts of Clark facing a relentless barrage of excessive physicality, cheap shots, and overtly hostile verbal taunts from opponents ever since she stepped onto a WNBA court. Specific incidents were highlighted as stark evidence. The notorious blindside body check by Chennedy Carter that sent shockwaves far beyond sports circles. Dejanay Carrington's aggressive hip check that looked more like a hockey move than a basketball play. And a pattern of hard, often uncalled fouls that left many wondering if there was a concerted effort to welcome Clark to the league with undue aggression. The PBD crew's most scathing indictment, however, centered on what they described as the WNBA's glaring and deeply ingrained double standards. They argued that the league's responses to player conduct, its approach to player protection, and, most controversially, how issues of race allegedly dictated its actions were wildly inconsistent. The PBD team painted a grim picture of a league leadership seemingly allowing allowing, if not tacitly encouraging, its most marketable asset to be systematically undermined. They pointed to what they called a disturbing and predictable pattern of selective outrage, where certain players seemed to receive swift protection and public support from the league, while others, particularly Clark, were left to fend for themselves, or worse, implicitly blamed for the animosity directed their way. This narrative of hypocrisy, of a league actively working against its own best interests by failing to shield its golden goose, became a cornerstone of their viral takedown, and this narrative of targeted neglect and institutional bias became even more potent when PBD's team dissected Clark's own earlier, well-publicized attempts to navigate the league's complex and often unforgiving cultural and political dynamics. Before the season even began, Caitlin Clark had made public statements addressing her position in the league, specifically acknowledging what she termed white privilege and expressing a desire to use her platform to elevate black women in the sport. These comments, likely intended as gestures of goodwill and an attempt to preemptively diffuse potential tensions, were seized upon by the Patrick Bet-David team and a significant portion of public opinion who offered a cuttingly different interpretation. According to Ashana and his colleagues, this well-intentioned strategy was a grave misjudgment, a naive attempt at appeasement that, instead of fostering acceptance or respect, made her appear weak and, ironically, painted an even larger target on her back. They argued that Clark's attempts at preemptive peacemaking and allyship were not received as genuine gestures of solidarity by some within the league, but were instead twisted into perceived admissions of unearned advantage or even culpability. This vulnerability, they contended, was then pounced upon by those who already resented her unprecedented spotlight, her record-breaking contracts, and the immense media attention that followed her every move. The PBD crew argued that this bending-the-knee gambit backfired catastrophically. Instead of shielding her from criticism or animosity, it emboldened her detractors, giving them further ammunition and framing her success, not as a testament to her talent and hard work, but as a product of systemic biases she herself had acknowledged. The message from PBD was clear. In the highly charged, often unforgiving arena of identity politics within professional sports, such attempts at conciliation by someone in Clark's position were doomed to fail, inviting more scorn than solidarity. The explosive fallout from these intertwined dynamics, the alleged targeting by opponents, the perceived inaction and double standards from the league, and Clark's own strategic choices in addressing her place in the WNBA began to reverberate far beyond individual player interactions. As the PBD team argued, it struck at the very foundations of the WNBA's long-term viability and credibility. The PBD team then broadened their attack, focusing on the WNBA's historically precarious financial state, a stark reality often downplayed but widely understood in sports business circles. They juxtaposed this long history of financial struggle and dependence on NBA subsidies with the unprecedented economic boom directly attributable to the Caitlin Clark effect. Sold-out arenas, record-shattering television viewership, skyrocketing merchandise sales, a massive influx of new fans. Clark was, by any objective measure, a financial miracle for the league. Yet, the PBD analysis painted a grim, almost tragic picture, a league catastrophically squandering a once-in-a-generation Midas touch. They argued that through internal strife, perceived mismanagement, and a stubborn refusal to constructively and unequivocally capitalize on Clark's immense popularity, the WNBA was fumbling its golden ticket. Instead of building a fortress around their most valuable asset, they allowed or even fostered a narrative of jealousy, resentment, and internal conflict to fester and spill into public view. Millions in new revenue, a tsunami of fresh interest. Yet the league seemed, in the eyes of critics like Oshana, more intent on navigating internal political sensitivities than on sound business strategy. The PBD team didn't mince words, labeling the situation as business malpractice on an epic scale. The idea that any professional organization would allow its biggest star, the primary driver of its newfound success, to be openly attacked, undermined, and seemingly unprotected was, to them, not just poor leadership, but a form of institutional self-sabotage. This entire raging inferno, ignited by a few contentious words and fanned into a national conversation by a podcast's unflinching, brutal honesty, now casts a long, ominous shadow. It extends far beyond the hardwood courts, raising fundamental and uncomfortable questions about the intersection of sports, culture, commerce, and identity in modern America. The viral commentary from Vincent Oshana and the Patrick Bet-David team did more than just critique a sports league. It became a lightning rod for wider, deeply felt societal frustrations. Many saw their takedown as a courageous stand against what they perceive as pervasive double standards in public discourse, particularly concerning issues of race, gender, and privilege. The PBD team tapped into a growing weariness with narratives that seem to suppress uncomfortable truths or shield certain individuals and groups from scrutiny. The silent majority argument quickly gained traction. The idea that Oshana and PBD had simply articulated what millions of people were thinking and whispering among themselves, but were hesitant to voice publicly, perhaps due to fear of backlash, social ostracization, or being unfairly labeled. A key theme in PBD's critique, and one that resonated powerfully, was the alleged silencing, dismissal, or aggressive downplaying of criticism when it's directed towards what are often seen as protected groups or narratives within the league and broader progressive circles. Did the PBD podcast merely rip the scab off a wound that many felt but few dared to acknowledge openly? Did they give a powerful, amplified voice to a burgeoning national unease about where the lines of acceptable discourse are currently drawn, who is permitted to be criticized without career-ending repercussions, and whose grievances are consistently amplified while others are systematically ignored, trivialized, or even ridiculed? The raw, unapologetic nature of their critique seemed to break through a dam of unspoken resentments, suggesting that the issues at play in the WNBA were merely a microcosm of larger, more systemic ideological battles raging across the cultural landscape. As the acrimonious dust from this media explosion refuses to settle, the implications for all key players, for Brittney Griner's legacy, for Caitlin Clark's career trajectory, for the PBD team's growing influence, and critically for the WNBA itself, are undeniably profound and potentially irreversible, signaling a point of no return. The echoes of this verbal demolition, this unflinching takedown by the Patrick Bet-David podcast, continue to reverberate, shaking the very foundations of women's professional basketball and sparking a national debate that shows no signs of abating. What began with alleged hot mic comments spiraled into a full-blown crisis, exposing fault lines of hypocrisy, perceived double standards, and what many have described as the catastrophic mismanagement of a transcendent talent in Caitlin Clark. The dominant damning themes that emerged from PBD's critique: rampant hypocrisy from veteran players, crippling double standards in league discipline and player protection, thinly veiled jealousy towards a rising star threatening the established order, and the almost unbelievable failure to safeguard and maximize the league's most valuable asset, have left an indelible mark. The question that now hangs heavy in the air is whether this public excoriation, this brutal and widely circulated reckoning, can serve as a painful but necessary catalyst for a league undeniably at a critical crossroads. Can the WNBA undertake the radical self-assessment and implement the genuine, systemic reforms needed to restore credibility and capitalize on its Clark-given opportunity? Or is this saga merely a prelude to an even more chaotic, self-destructive future, where its brightest star continues to shine brilliantly amidst a raging storm of the league's own making? A storm so fierce it threatens to consume everything and everyone in its path. The answers will not only define the future of a sports league, but will also offer a stark commentary on our times, challenging us all to look beyond the immediate drama and consider the larger, more uncomfortable implications for sports, media, and the very nature of cultural dialogue in a deeply fractured world.